Hey everyone, it's time for another build. Today we're going to be doing Ensky's Paper Theater series, Spirited Away PT-050 in a Mysterious City. So as you can see here, it comes with instructions that are in a graphical format, and they have some wordings on the side, on the left side, but it may be in Japanese or in English depending on where you buy it from. And then the parts here, the pieces of paper are all laser cut, and all you have to do is just use a utility knife to cut off the little portions that's attached to the bigger piece of paper. But for the most part, it is very simple, and all you need is glue, utility knife, and maybe a tweezer to be able to put the set together. So I wanted to talk a little bit about glue. So I typically use two different types of glue for paper models. One would be a thicker tacky glue, and right now what I'm using right now is Mod Podge. And I like using Mod Podge because it's very thin, so it can actually be applied very thinly across with a brush, and it dries relatively quickly. That with the paper models, I've noticed that this has been the best yield for my time because it dries almost instantaneously. One thing to look out for when you're gluing, especially paper, is to make sure that the glue is as thin as possible. A lot of times if you're using like Elmer's glue or like even tacky glue, if you put too thick of a layer, it'll take time to dry, of course, but also depending on the type of paper that uh, they're using, the paper might actually warp or might get soggy and actually start breaking down. With the paper theater models, I have noticed that it has not been an issue, but when I'm pressing down on the paper, when I'm gluing, if I have too much glue on it, it will seep out and then it gets really messy. And then I'm spending a lot of time using a toothpick or like X-Acto knife to kind of scrape across and actually picking up a lot of the excess glue. So what's actually easier to do is just using a paintbrush and only maybe dotting a few areas and then using that paintbrush to kind of wipe it across to make sure that it is thinly spread out. So I typically like using my hands when I'm doing a lot of modeling just because I can get more finesse movements and I'm actually more accurate with my fingers than with a tweezer. But in this instance, I actually like using a tweezer to start aligning by using the tip of the tweezer and then moving it across until both layers of the paper are lined up, and you'll know when it will stop. And what that means is that if I'm actually aligning the edge, if I run the one tweezer along the edge, I know that it will stop when both align to the same edge. And if I'm putting it within the hole and then I start moving around in a little circular motion, when none of the pieces move, I know that at least the holes are aligned now. So if you haven't noticed yet, I actually pre-cut my pieces before I start recording just to save time because I've noticed a lot of my time is actually spent cutting out the pieces rather than gluing it. So I've noticed that it's kind of boring to just keep watching the X-Acto knife and just running across the paper. So I've just decided to omit all that for the build videos themselves. So you're about to see something that I do quite often when I'm doing any gluing is I'll use a toothpick, especially for those fine little areas where it's hard to get clean with a piece of paper or any other object. I would actually run the toothpick along and actually scrape up the excess of glue that's actually seeping out when I'm pressing against the paper. This build has been relatively smooth because the paper theater models are pretty simple and the instructions are awesome. So I will say one more before I just run the video with maybe some background music. My only other tip really for these paper theater models is that you might want to try placing the piece on first to kind of visualize where pieces may overlap or not, because I made the mistake a few times of gluing the whole side of one of the pieces just to find out that a lot of the areas will be exposed, and now you have these really ugly glue marks that are on the paper that you can't really scrape off too much. So what I try to do is visualize it by seeing where it overlaps and try to remember it mentally where it overlaps, and then only gluing those certain areas, just so that I don't have a lot of glue marks and it just becomes a very clean model. There's not much more to say about these paper models, so I'll just leave it with the background music running and enjoy the rest of the build.